do I have the right people on the bus? There's always that bigger question of, are the people that I'm working with the right people?
Is the team actually really committed to doing what's necessary to achieve the results?
I haven't come across any other assessment tool that's giving you that depth of, insight.
Thanks everybody for jumping on and watching this session that we're going to be recording today, talking very much about using sales assessments in the sales environment. Thanks so much for joining, Andrea. Love for the opportunity for you to introduce yourself to our audience.
I work for SalesStar Australasia. I'm a business development manager. Prior to that, I actually was on the client side of SalesStar for about 6 years. So a lot of experience using OMG, working with SalesStar to get really great outcomes for my sales team. So I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic, Andrea. And I think one of the things I'm most excited about is you've still got very fresh experience from the customer side. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to give us quite a unique perspective during our conversation. So super excited to learn all about your experiences. My role is very much as a high performance coach with the clients, mostly in Australia, but some in New Zealand as well. Like Andrea, I also joined after working as a SalesStar customer at one stage, and absolutely loved the opportunity to work with so many clients and helping their sales teams develop and grow. So awesome experience. So I'm really keen, before we actually start to talk about the sales assessments, really keen to get your perspective on some of the common challenges that you've seen clients with sales teams face in relation to their sales team performance.
Oh my goodness, where do you start, right? So I think some of the big things that really stand out for me are that, do I have the right people on the bus? So when you're looking at performance within your sales team, there's always that bigger question of, are the people that I'm working with the right people? And is the performance because of things that we're not doing, or that we could be doing? Or is it actually just not the right role or the right fit for them? I think accountability is a big one. You not just holding your salespeople accountable, but for them holding themselves accountable as well. You hear a lot of excuse making. I knew when I was hearing that excuse making, I was aware of it, but it was about how to, get them accountable for their own excuse making, rather than feeling that I needed to, I suppose, micromanage them, which, we all know for a lot of salespeople is not how you get the best out of them. Another thing that I think as well is that complacency. So I have worked with some very, very high performing, salespeople, some excellent ones. And I think that there's always that danger with your high performers that they put on that I've made it badge. They've nailed the targets, they've made the money, they've done all of the things. Where do they go from there? So it's kind of understanding. First, you have to understand those people, and then you have to understand, how do you still get the best out of them when they feel like they're already there? And then I think following process as well. I think for a lot of salespeople, and sometimes myself included, they're very much, think on the fly and react quickly and, moving quickly. They're often creative, thinkers, not necessarily process driven. So I think being able to pull them back to that process and get them following all of those steps, that's definitely been a performance challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, and I think those are some definitely big challenges for sales leaders in the business to deal with. Would you also think that possibly some of the challenges or other challenges that sales leaders would deal with is understanding where they need to focus to actually develop and improve their sales team's capabilities?
Oh, definitely. And I think sometimes that's quite an overwhelming question. You look at your sales team, and whether you're coming into a business new or whether it's a team that you're already working with, and you look at all these areas where you could improve, you could make change. And so to sit back and go, where do I start with that? What's the priority? Where are we going to get the most bang for our buck? that can definitely be a pretty overwhelming question.
It's not just one or two companies. I think it's quite common across many sales teams that they face those sort of challenges.
And so I'm interested, Andre, from a coaching perspective, like what are some of the common challenges that your clients are facing, in relation to their sales team performance when you're in that coaching side of things?
A couple of them that spring to mind is firstly the commitment from the sales team. Is the team actually really committed to doing what's necessary to achieve the results? And I see that a lot with salespeople where they're willing to do it provided it suits them. And otherwise, a lot of excuses creep in. So that level of commitment to actually do what's necessary to do that. Other key one that I see quite often is not taking responsibility. So when things are going great and the results are looking good, that's fantastic, right? But when you really see the true colors come out with the sales team is when things get tough or where they're behind target. And do they make excuses or blame the economy or blame the competition or the company? Or do they actually take ownership and take responsibility and create an action plan for themselves to try to get back on track? A couple of others that are interesting is mismatch of skills and capability in sales roles. So, you might have some people that I can think of a couple of examples where they're expected to go hunt for new business, but their actual skill profile and personality profile is more suited to account management. And so that creates a challenge for the person because it's like a square peg in a round hole. So that can be really frustrating for the company and the salesperson. And then I think another one, as I'm just rattling through, there's so many motivational factors not being aligned. Now I see that a lot with companies where they try to use the carrot with incentive programs, for example, and not understanding that not all salespeople are wired the same way in terms of how they're motivated. And so it doesn't always drive the motivation. The last one that springs to mind is just the skills and the lack of skills in certain areas, especially around consultative selling, which is so important in today's landscape. And you see a lot of salespeople all taking the same approach between the customers we work with and their competitors, knocking on customers' doors and asking for the opportunity to quote, instead of really trying to position themselves as the trusted advisor. So not having those skills that are essential to actually give them that competitive advantage.
Yeah, and so what do you think, Andre? Like, if there's people that are watching, listening, and nodding their heads like I am, going, yeah, so much of this resonates with me in terms of these challenges, what would be your advice around where do you start? Because I know that for a lot of sales managers, the common thing is, look, I know that all of these things are challenges and I know that we need to resolve them, but I just don't have the time and I'm not sure where to start. What would be your advice in terms of, what's the best starting point?
Yeah, great question, Andrea. Look, the starting point that we take with all customers is to actually start to put some common language and some common measures and frameworks around all of these things. Because unless you get that common framework and language and framework around it, it's very, very hard to actually start to assess and benchmark. And so that's where we use sales assessments to actually help us to really assess that and put some metrics around it so that we can actually compare not only within the team, but also compare against top performers out there in the market, so we can actually see where the team actually sits relative to that. And that then helps to start to identify opportunities for development and improvement, as well as I mentioned earlier on, if there is a mismatch of skills, to maybe get the people in the right seats as well. So really getting that baseline and benchmark and measures in place that helps us actually really understand what we're dealing with and putting that common language around it.
I agree. I think you have to start by being on the same page, right? You have to start by, setting benchmarks that everybody can be clear on and can work to. So that's great advice. Thank you.
So, Andrea, question for you. So for our viewers watching again, I know you've used the OMG assessments, sales assessments that we've spoken about, but for those watching that have never heard of OMG before, I certainly never had before I started working with SalesStar. Could you share with the viewers what is OMG and what do they do?
Yeah, of course. So OMG, Objective Management Group, it's a science-based sales assessment tool. And what's really unique about it is it's sales specific, it's role specific, it's highly predictive, and it also provides some really great insights into your team effectiveness. But I think from the client perspective, what I liken it to is it's a roadmap. It's providing you with direction, what to look for, where to dig deeper.
Yeah, that's a great point. People might be watching this and thinking, does the assessment, provide a pass or a fail score? What would you say to people that might be having that in their minds?
No, so it's definitely not a pass or fail. So there are two different ways that the assessment works. So if you're doing candidate assessments through the recruitment process, then you're getting a recommended, a worthy of consideration, or a not recommended. If you're doing an evaluation with your existing team, essentially the information that you're getting in that assessment is the same, but the way that that is presented is different. So you're not going to sit down with somebody in your sales team and give them a big fat not recommended, for a position that they're already doing. It's kind of scaling, how well do you fit this role in these key areas? Do you have the right mindset? What sort of hidden weaknesses, might be a factor in holding you back? And do you have, the skill set that this organization is looking for?
For anybody watching that maybe is familiar with, personality profile assessments like DISC or Myers-Briggs or those sort of things, which are not quantitative, they're more qualitative in nature. How would you compare OMG against those type of assessments?
Yeah, I think, and I've done a lot of that sort of assessment myself. Some of them are definitely interesting, but what I think really sets OMG apart is it's just the level of insight, and it's also the direction that it gives you, even insofar as to tell you things like what sort of longevity do we think this person's going to have within the company? How confident are we in the answers that they've given? Here's the things that we're concerned about. These are the questions that we think you need to ask. And these are the sorts of answers that you should be looking out for. I haven't come across any other assessment tool that's giving you that depth of, insight.
One of the great things that I've loved about doing these evaluations, especially if we're starting off with the new client and we're working with their existing team, is it helps me as a coach really quickly identify where the skill gaps are. And so instead of maybe wasting a lot of time initially focusing on, generalized areas, we can really start to hone in on specific areas that are going to maximize the benefit to the client. The other really important one is to help the sales leaders that we work with to actually understand how they can really be more effective coaching their team. Things like identifying the motivators. So what motivates the team members? So it provides a really strong common language around that. But also many self-limiting beliefs that the sales team have that actually get in the way of them being effective. For example, a really good one that I always love to talk about is how we purchase nowadays. If you're somebody, Andrea, like me, who if you're going to go buy, let's say, a new motor vehicle or a big TV or something like that, we may tend to do a lot of research and go and do all the online research, prepare all the data and everything before we buy. And so as a salesperson, if a customer's asking us to do the same thing, collect a lot of information and do the same thing, we might empathize with them and think, well, fair enough, we would also do that, instead of actually challenging that process. So it gives us a lot of insights to help the sales leaders to understand some of the behaviors that need to be undone to help the salespeople to become more aware.
Where would you say, André, where have you had the most pushback? As a coach, when you're working with people, and you might be, going through with a sales leader, a sales manager, their team's evaluations, where do you tend to get the most pushback? Or are there common areas that you get, that pushback on?
It very much comes down to what we call the will to sell. And so the will to sell measures a couple of different attributes. The desire and the commitment around selling and taking responsibility. And those scores are very, very subjective for people that don't understand the OMG assessments, and especially where family members might be involved in the company or the sales team. And it's very hard. They might look at somebody and say, well, I know this person, and our perception of them is that they have a strong commitment and strong responsibility score, whereas OMG might be telling us the complete opposite. So that's probably the biggest area I found where people might struggle with it, because based on their perception, but of course they're only benchmarking the person that they know, not necessarily comparing against what OMG does, which is comparing against the top sales performers.
So if you are a sales manager working with your sales team, if you do have some people within your team that are really struggling in some of those will to sell competencies, how do you normally start that coaching conversation?
Yeah, so if I'm working with a sales leader, normally what I would ask them is to go back to a time when maybe there was a dip in the market and they were really struggling to stay on budget or achieve their targets, and to think back to the behaviors of the sales team during that time. That's not always that easy. Sometimes it's new salespeople that are on board, so the sales leader hasn't had the opportunity to see that. But that's probably where I would start that conversation, is to say, well, think about a time when that person was struggling to hit target, and what was their behavior? How did they go about it? And that might start to uncover some of the behaviors that they might look for. And if it's not, I might then go to some other similar behaviors to say, look, did you have you had a challenging situation in the team where somebody needed to step up, and how did they behave? So trying to come back to certain behaviors and see if there is a trend or a pattern that might actually help to explain what we're seeing there.
Yeah, okay, I love that.
Question that I have for you is, from being on the customer side, have you come across any reluctance for people to either do the OMG evaluations or actually to believe in the information or the results that come out of it from your perspective?
Oh, definitely. My goodness, the stories I could tell. I think that so there's a few things, right? So I've certainly had existing staff that have been really reluctant to do an evaluation. And usually that's because they're concerned about, what it might uncover, but also what it might mean for them afterwards. So whether it's that they're concerned about, oh, is this, going to be used against me in terms of I could lose my job, or is it something where there's going to be a whole lot of work involved for me after this point, and I don't really want that. So certainly things like that with existing staff have come up. I think the thing that I always come back to, if it's, my existing team, is OMG is an investment in your team, right? In their learning, in their development. It's not a tool that you are using against them. It's a tool that you are using with them, and to support their individual growth, but also your growth as a team. So I think that that's a really important point.
Fantastic advice. If I pop you on the spot for a moment, Andrea, if we were to give sales leaders top 3 tips on getting their team ready to actually do the assessments.
Yeah, I think if what you're looking at is an existing team and you want to get them all completing the assessment, I think the biggest thing is having that conversation around what is the purpose, right? So the purpose is to understand where you are now so that we can help you get to where you want to be. I think it's also important to cover off the practical things. People like to understand, what they're doing, what's expected of them. Make sure that you're doing the assessment at a time where you're free of other distractions, and, that you allow yourself the sufficient time. Outside of that, it's make sure that you also understand the assessment before you start assessing your team. So a roadmap's only any good if you know how to read it. So make sure that you've invested the time in, doing the debrief, understanding what you're getting your team to do. Look at, get your own assessment done. Be willing to pull apart your own outcomes, and really understand what it is that you're asking your team to do before you jump in and do it. And I know that for me, one of the things that was really effective with one of my teams was making myself really vulnerable to begin with. So I had done, the first time that I actually did an OMG assessment, I was worthy of consideration. So, which felt pretty underwhelming, to be fair. And I wasn't, particularly proud of that. But, I shared that with the team. I talked about some of the insights from my own assessment and just created a really safe space, setting up for the fact that, hey, some of them may not get the results that they're after either. And that's okay. We can talk about it. We can put a plan in place, and we can reassess down the track and be really proud of how far we've come.
Yeah, awesome to get your perspective from the client side. It's actually really interesting for me just reflecting on the two different lenses that we have on this process, but how much commonality there is in it, and also the benefits that our clients get out of it from going through the process. So just for people watching, thank you so much for those of you that have taken the opportunity to watch this session. Please keep an eye out for the next sessions coming up. There will be a number of additional Coaches Corners recordings coming out in the near future, so watch the space, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.